of cross-border security, trade, and travel for my state and the entire nation. Our ports along the southwest border play a critical role in facilitating trade and ensuring the safety, prosperity, and economic security of the American people. The United States shares strong economic and cultural ties with Mexico, and any disruption to this relationship has adverse effects on investment, employment, productivity, and competitiveness. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly created new challenges, and the 20-month closure of the border to non-essential travel seriously hurt local border communities. Our ports are also the key link to securing our border. Most seizures of illicit drugs at our border happen at ports of entry. It's critical that we ensure we are making the right security investment at our ports of entry, both now and in the future. Our nation must slow the flow of illegal goods and drugs through our ports of entry while also maintaining the efficient flow of legitimate trade and travel. I was proud to lead bipartisan efforts in the Senate that produced the bipartisan infrastructure package that was signed into law on Monday by the President. This historic legislation included $3.85 billion to modernize land ports of entry throughout the nation, including 2 ports in Arizona. This investment takes an important step in ensuring that our ports have the right infrastructure footprint to meet our nation's needs. But there are other initiatives beyond infrastructure we need to consider at our ports of entry. New technology, including non-intrusive inspection, plays a critical role in any effort to improve security at our ports of entry. It's critical to understand what technology is needed right now, both to detect and deter shipments of illegal drugs, but also to facilitate the flow of legitimate trade and travel. And as always, the key part of improved border security is a strong border workforce. Our port officers have worked the past year in challenging circumstances in the midst of a global pandemic, and I honor their efforts. I hope today's hearing can help us focus our border security discussions back towards ports of entry. I want to continue gathering an understanding of the current challenges at our southwest border ports and discuss the appropriate technology, infrastructure, and personnel investments needed to ensure our ports can be secure and fully operational today, tomorrow, and years into the future. I'm pleased to have a strong panel of government leaders on our witness panel today who will bring important expertise on workforce, trade, and security issues. And with that, I'd like to recognize our subcommittee ranking member, Senator James Lankford, for his opening statement.
Senator Sinema, thank you very much for this and for holding this hearing. At our last hearing on this issue on the ports of entry along the southwest border that we held in June, we'd encountered about a 20-year high in the number of migrants that attempted to cross the southwest border. We were at that time also seeing a significant surge in the amount of fentanyl that CBP was interdicting along the southwest border. Unfortunately, since June, these problems have only continued to compound. We recently concluded fiscal year 2021, where we saw the U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered over 1.7 million migrants. That is the highest number of encounters in American history. During that same window of time, CBP interdicted over 10,000 pounds of fentanyl, the highest amount in our recorded history, a tenfold growth from when the government first encountered fentanyl in 2016. These 2 data points only capture what we interdict, not the totality of the picture, though. Outside experts and officials in the government are all aware that we have more got-away immigrants who had crossed the border this year illegally and significantly more drugs than were interdicted that flow through our port of entry. This crisis has significantly strained the federal government's resources. It's invited active harm into our communities. Stories about fentanyl overdoses, heroin overdoses, violence endemic to the narcotic trade are all too common now. In 2020, Oklahoma reported 629 methamphetamine-related deaths. Unfortunately, in this past year, we've just crossed the highest number of overdose deaths due to opioids, fentanyl, and all that we've had ever. 100,000 people died between April of 2020 and April of 2021. It's the first time that drug-related deaths have reached 6 figures in any 12-month period. Over the last 5 years, the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics has seen the vast majority of meth and fentanyl in Oklahoma are items that have been smuggled through Mexico into the southwest, over the southwest border. We're becoming more and more aware of the humanitarian and national security implications of ongoing surge at the southwest border. We hear stories about unaccompanied minors being victimized for labor trafficking. Around the same time the DHS began reopening to fully vaccinated non-essential travelers, CBP announced that it's formally ended the policy of metering, which allowed CBP to control the flow of migrants during large surges by metering or creating a waiting list for the migrants to enter the United States and claim asylum. The Obama administration instituted metering in 2016 to ensure that CBP could fully meet its obligation to facilitate a secure and lawful trade and traffic at our ports while dealing with the surge of migrants. Career staff who served in the Obama and Trump administrations have stated the metering policy was useful as CBP navigated increasing flows of migrants. Rescinding the metering tool, I fear, will open up our ports to increased risk by allowing cartels to be able to surge migrants at the ports and overwhelm them to distract CBP while they move fentanyl and hard narcotics across the border. As our country reopens to travel, we have not seen how DHS will manage the increased demand for lawful trade and travel across our southwest border, which is essential to our economy. However, the rescission of the metering policy will force CBP to make tough decisions about how to balance responding to a surge of migrants while fulfilling its mission of facilitating lawful trade and travel. Our port facilities at the southwest border further compound these problems. They're not designed to hold individuals in detention, which is why CBP has historically relied on metering. These facilities are also becoming increasingly strained and facing difficulties meeting our trade obligations or handling an increase in travelers. GSA, the General Services Administration, told Congress in a report that steady global and regional growth has funneled more people and goods through our nation's aging land port of entry infrastructure than it is able to handle. 2/3 of our land ports of entry have not had capital improvements in over a decade. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, we've heard about disrupted supply chains and long wait times for shipped goods. We face significant difficulties obtaining the analogs and components our country needs for basic manufacturing. As our seaports continue to face crisis levels of congestion, it is likely that our aging land ports will face increased strains as they struggle to keep up with the demand for goods. Unfortunately, many of our ports along the southwest border were built before NAFTA and the USMCA, and they haven't been touched since these two agreements went into effect. Even worse, our ports have not been able to keep up with the evolving threat landscape over the last few decades. China has recently begun exploiting our aging ports at the southwest border by shipping fentanyl and synthetic opioid analogs to Mexico and then working with the cartels to be able to smuggle them across our ports. According to the DEA, cartels transport bulk quantity polydrug loads via commercial and passenger vehicles, and they do so by exploiting major highway routes for transportation. The DEA notes that the most common method of drug smuggling in the United States involves smuggling illicit drugs through U.S. ports of entry and passenger vehicles with concealed compartments or commingled with legitimate goods on tractor trailers. Over the coming weeks and months, we'll see the strain on our aging ports as we work to reopen our country even more. And unless the administration takes action to get the border crisis under control, we'll also likely see the ongoing migrant surge continue to take away from CBP's efforts to stop illicit narcotics, counterfeit goods, and other threats that undermine our public safety and national security. I'm grateful for our witnesses that they're here today, that we can get a chance to be able to talk through some of these issues while all of us are in the same room to be able to discuss this. I'm very aware some folks are joining us online in that dialogue, and some folks will be coming in and out of the room, but we're very grateful for your testimony and for us putting this on the record today.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lankford. Now, it's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses, so if you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Now I'll introduce our witnesses so they may present their opening statements. I ask each of our witnesses to keep their opening statements to 5 minutes, and your full written statements will be submitted for the record. Our first witness is Diane Sabatino, who's been serving as the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Field Operations since July of 2020. In this position, Ms. Sabatino oversees operations at over 330 ports of entry to support the national security, immigration, customs, and commercial trade-related missions of CBP. Mrs. Sabatino, we are honored to have you join us today, and you're now recognized for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Sinema, Ranking Member Lankford, and members of the subcommittee, it's my honor to appear before you today on behalf of the men and women of CBP's Office of Field Operations to discuss ports of entry along the southwest border. The nation's ports of entry are vital gateways for cross-border commerce and travel, critical sectors that drive economic growth and opportunities for American businesses and consumers. We manage complex processes to facilitate safe and lawful travel, inspect goods for possible hazards and unfair trade practices, and stop threats at the border. The recent years and months reaffirm that our land ports of entry must be prepared to respond and adapt to fluctuations in travel, trade, migration flows, as well as unprecedented events such as the COVID-19 pandemic. CBP was ready to accommodate the increased traffic following the eased restrictions on non-essential travel at our land ports of entry for travelers fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and we anticipate increased private and commercial traffic as we approach the holidays. Some challenges facing our ports are persistent. Such threats as terrorist groups, drug traffickers, smugglers, and other adversaries, but those threats are never static, nor are they wholly predictable. These adversaries constantly change their methodologies to avoid detection. Many of our inspection facilities were not built to support present-day security and operational missions. However, CBP continues to work with our partners to modernize these ports of entry while also actively implementing innovative technology and business solutions to effectively interdict contraband and other threats without impeding legitimate traffic. We pursue advanced technology to identify high-risk shipments and individuals before they reach our borders, including digital solutions that, combined with enhanced infrastructure and other integrated technology, streamlines our processes. At the ports, license plate readers and dedicated lanes for travelers using RFID-enabled documents provide officers valuable extra time to identify a threat and to speed the process to determine the admissibility of vehicle occupants. We've deployed simplified arrival to all of our pedestrian crossings at the southwest border and most of the crossings on the northern border, and we're currently testing simplified arrival at the port of Anzalduas, Texas, in select vehicle lanes. Simplified arrival incorporates facial biometric comparison technology to alleviate the administrative burden from our frontline officers and afford them more time to engage with travelers to determine intent. Since the initial deployments of our Simplified Arrival program across all of our port environments, we've identified over 950 imposters attempting to use identities on genuine travel documents, and over 600 of those imposters were identified along the southwest border this year alone. We operate more than 350 large-scale, non-intrusive inspection, or NII, systems at land ports and seaports of entry to scan conveyances for anomalies. In fiscal year 20, these inspections resulted in the interdiction of more than 470,000 pounds of narcotics and $11.5 million of unreported currency. Approximately 90% of the NII attributable seizures resulted from scanning less than 2% of primary passenger vehicles and 15% of commercial vehicles crossing the southwest border. By FY23, we expect to increase NII scans of those vehicles to 40% and at least 72% respectively. But we leverage our partnerships with the private sector, local governments, and border communities. For example, and thanks to the great support of Congress, the Donations Acceptance Program also continues to be a key mechanism to address port-specific infrastructure and resource challenges. We invest in our personnel, our most critical asset, and use sophisticated workload staffing models to identify staffing needs and analyze trends to anticipate future requirements. We coordinate with our federal partners, including GSA and ICE, as well as others, from infrastructure modernization projects to information sharing and intelligence analysis at the National Targeting Center. Our federal partnerships are all essential to our port of entry operations. We actively pursue new capabilities and initiatives, such as the Future of Traveler Inspection and Port of the Future concepts, to draw together experts, frontline personnel, and stakeholders from all levels to improve our processing workflows. Despite the challenges we face, we continue to make progress toward upgrading facilities, incorporating effective technology, and implementing innovative solutions for the ever-evolving challenges and threats both at and beyond our borders. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Our second witness is Joe Geronimo, the Deputy Assistant Director for ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Transnational Organized Crime Division. HSI is the principal investigative component of the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for investigating transnational crime and threats that exploit the infrastructure through which international trade, travel, and finance move. Mr. Geronimo, thank you for your work and for joining us today, and you're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Sabatino, Ranking Member Lankford, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Government Operations and Border Management. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the efforts of Homeland Security investigations to secure the United States from transnational crimes and threats. As the principal investigative component of DHS, HSI is a premier global law enforcement organization responsible for conducting federal criminal investigations at every critical location in the cycle. Internationally, in cooperation with foreign counterparts, where transnational criminal and terrorist organizations operate, at our nation's physical border and ports of entry in coordination with CBP, where illicit smuggling cells attempt to exploit America's legitimate trade, travel, and transportation systems, and in cities throughout the United States where criminal organizations earn substantial profits off their illicit activities. The missions of HSI and CBP are connected and complementary. Neither agency can fully succeed in its efforts to secure the homeland without an unwavering commitment and support from the other, nor can HSI and CBP maximize their collective contributions to homeland security without coordinating and deconflicting law enforcement responses and actions. In collaboration with its strategic partners in the United States and abroad, HSI special agents gather evidence used to identify and build criminal cases against TCOs, terrorist networks and facilitators, and other criminal elements that threaten the homeland. HSI works with prosecutors to indict and arrest violators, execute criminal search warrants, seize criminal-derived money and assets, and take other actions designed to disrupt and dismantle criminal organizations operating around the world. These efforts protect the national security and public safety of the United States. Conducting criminal investigations and prosecutions resulting from arrests associated with CBP seizures is necessary for ensuring the rule of law. However, HSI's mandate is to use multi-defendant, multi-jurisdictional, complex investigations to disrupt and dismantle TCOs. The impressive narcotic seizures at our border ports of entry clearly demonstrate CBP's diligence in protecting America's border, but also the ability of TCOs to absorb substantial losses while continuing to function. Land border contraband seizures are necessary but cannot degrade TCO capabilities or imprison TCO leadership without HSI's investigations. HSI aims to push out the U.S. borders and stem illegal activity targeting the homeland while still abroad, as HSI authorities do not start or stop at ports of entry or along the borders, but rather extend into international domains and into the interior of the United States. With the largest international investigative presence in DHS comprised of 80 offices in over 50 countries, HSI focuses on expanding the borders out, remaining forward-leaning in our approach to identify and mitigate threats before they reach our borders. This multi-tiered, multi-pronged strategy is one which spans international boundaries and crosses all investigative program areas and authorities that HSI enforces. To complement its international focus, HSI's efforts continue at the border and within our field offices throughout the United States, where HSI special agents respond to and investigate schemes that are encountered or identified at the U.S. border. At ports of entry along the southwest land border, smugglers use a wide variety of tactics and techniques for concealing illicit contraband. Our special agents work every day with CBP officers to identify, seize, and investigate TCOs that attempt to exploit ports of entry to introduce illicit contraband into the United States. As such, HSI focuses on disrupting and dismantling TCOs by working with CBP on collecting, examining, and exploiting information gathered from interdictions by CBP and other law enforcement partners in furthering new or ongoing investigations, as well as execute enforcement actions that will disrupt and dismantle the criminal activity of TCOs and their operations. The multifaceted, complex, transnational nature of crimes surrounding illicit activity requires an equally robust and layered investigative response, which HSI implements on multiple fronts. This starts abroad and continues domestically, where HSI special agents and criminal analysts assigned to over 220 offices across the United States respond to and pursue investigations into illicit smuggling and trafficking. HSI's comprehensive strategy to conduct complex, large-scale investigations represents one of DHS's best weapons for dismantling TCOs in a manner not possible solely through border interdiction efforts. United in our partnership with CBP at the border and ports of entry, as well as our efforts with the interior of the United States, HSI uses its full breadth of its authorities and expertise to pursue investigations and attack all aspects of TCOs. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of HSI and the critical investigative role it plays in investigating TCOs. HSI remains committed to its mission to secure the homeland from transnational crime and threats and to uphold the national security and public safety of the United States. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Our final witness is Stuart Burns, the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Portfolio Management and Customer Engagement for the General Services Administration's Public Building Service. PBS, amongst other things, acquires space through new construction and leasing and maintains federal properties nationwide. This includes over 100 land ports of entry. Mr. Burns, thank you for joining us today, and you're recognized for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Sinema, Ranking Member Lankford, and the members of the subcommittee. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to testify at the hearing on improving security, trade, and travel flows at the Southwest border ports of entry. GSA's mission is to deliver the best value in real estate, acquisition, and technology services to the government and the American people. To meet the federal government's real estate and technology needs along the borders, GSA maintains a close partnership with Department of Homeland Security's Customs and Border Protection, the other federal inspection agencies like Department of Agriculture, Department of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. As you know, CBP is our primary partner among the many federal inspection agencies stationed along the American land borders, and it's essential that they have modern facilities to perform their critical mission of safeguarding our borders and enhancing the nation's economic prosperity. Investment in new and existing land ports of entry strengthens trade, tourism, and commerce, creates jobs, and bolsters our nation's security. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Sinema and the other members of the subcommittee for their work to include these land ports in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which you mentioned was signed into law on Monday. Now that the legislation is enacted, GSA will work with CBP and our other partners to construct new and modernize existing land ports of entry at dozens of border stations across the northern and southern border. Additionally, GSA will undertake paving projects to improve road infrastructure leading to and from and also within the ports. These critical investments will provide modern and energy-efficient facilities for federal inspection agencies and benefit our state, local, and private partners. The $3.4 billion provided to GSA and the $400 million provided to CBP will address critical infrastructure priorities for our country and eliminate a substantial backlog of outstanding projects. GSA is well positioned to undertake and deliver on this LPOE program. We have a consistent track record of delivering capital projects on time and on budget. Our successes are the result of leveraging project resources and subject matter experts across GSA. This approach results in the application of industry best practices in site acquisition, environmental analysis, design, construction, and delivery of these facilities. This collaborative team approach has contributed to the success of many projects. As you mentioned, there are 167 land ports of entry across nearly 7,500 miles of the United States borders, and GSA manages 123. GSA land ports of entry serve diverse mission needs at a diverse set of locations that include urban communities like San Diego, California, El Paso, Texas, and Detroit, Michigan, as well as remote localities like Douglas, Arizona, Van Buren, Maine, and Alcan, Alaska. Safe, secure, and modern land ports along our borders are critical to ensuring an efficient flow of commerce and people that supports jobs and economic growth. However, the average LPOE in GSA's portfolio was designed and constructed more than 40 years ago. As a result, many of these facilities are functionally obsolete for the 21st century. This, in turn, has a negative effect on American trade, tourism, commerce, jobs, and national security. To inform and facilitate investment in the land ports of entry, GSA coordinates and assists CBP in evaluating and prioritizing the facilities for investment. Over the past 5 years, this process has resulted in significant investments in the land ports at Calexico and San Ysidro in California, Columbus, New Mexico, Tornillo and Laredo in Texas, and Alexandria Bay, New York. GSA works closely with CBP to ensure that their priority projects are integrated into GSA's larger multi-year priority plan. As part of that plan, GSA consults with CBP and other stakeholder agencies, such as the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, at the outset of project planning, and we continue that relationship throughout the life cycle of project delivery. An example of this partnership in practice was the expansion and modernization of the San Ysidro Land Port of Entry in California. GSA incorporated each of those agencies' programs of requirements into one modernized facility. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about GSA's ongoing partnership with CBP and others to deliver on the land ports modernization program at the northern and southern border, and this historic opportunity that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act presents to bring these critical facilities into the 21st century. I welcome the opportunity to discuss GSA's commitment to strategic investment in our nation's land ports, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Now we'll begin the question portion of the hearing. Each senator will receive 7 minutes for questions. I'll recognize myself first for 7 minutes. My first question is for Ms. Sabatino and Mr. Burns. With the recent passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Congress provided a significant investment in improving our ports of entry. This investment will help provide more security and more efficient trade and travel, but security is a constantly evolving challenge, and Congress and the administration should always be planning for the future. Looking at ports of entry, what steps should Congress take now so that our nation has the infrastructure it needs 10 years from now? Ms. Sabatino, I'll ask you to address this first, as I'm curious to learn more about how this will fit with CBP's Port of the Future concept of operation that seeks to transform port workflow and technology processes.
Thank you for the question, Chairwoman. CBP makes significant investments in research and development for new technology to enhance our current infrastructure on the port. That's complemented by our investments in prioritizing land ports of entry for infrastructure investments when the opportunities present itself. We certainly thank you for your support in the infrastructure bill. We look forward to being able to complete 16 of the priority projects on the 5-year capital investment plan. But in addition to that, another 10 potentially covered for modernization efforts. With the Port of the Future concept focusing on the cargo operations and streamlining workflows, we've been making investments in building out technology that's going to integrate information for our CBP officers and agriculture specialists into an integrated viewer platform that is taking all of the information as the NII technology is deployed, the information from the RFID, the information once we have the simplified arrival program rolled out into a common viewer so that we can give our officers the best tools and information to make decisions quickly and essentially automate every part of the process that we can, again, giving them the time to invest in the interviews with individuals or the time to look further at the actual commodities and do what they do best. With the future travel initiatives, we have been looking at comprehensively across all of our travel environments where we can leverage new technology and, again, automate processes to remove the administrative burden from our frontline personnel. That includes the facial biometric comparison technology, but also affording travelers the opportunity to apply for I-94s in advance that they could do previously already through our website and now through a mobile application in the CBP One portal. But all of these individual investments that we look at, to refine legitimate in travel and trade, helping us provide the officers the tools and the time to address the significant challenge and identify those threats that cross the border on a daily basis.
Thank you, Chairman. We rely extensively on CBP and the other inspection agencies at those land ports to define what the requirements are and what the projected flows are through those land ports of entry. That's why we have a heavy coordination effort in our capital planning and our requests to Congress for funding for the land ports of entry moving forward.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Sabatino. I want to discuss the role of ports of entry in the flow of migrants across the border. The administration recently announced an end to the practice of metering of asylum seekers at ports of entry, and the comment period of the new asylum rule recently closed. Now, I've visited ports of entry in Arizona, and I've seen firsthand the limited facilities to fairly and humanely process migrants and asylum seekers at ports of entry. So what steps is OFO taking to ensure that ports of entry are prepared to deal with the potential for increased numbers of migrants seeking asylum and other forms of relief? I'd especially like to know how OFO is ensuring this need is taken into consideration when modernizing our ports of entry.
Thank you for the question. Regarding the steps with respect to the ability to manage the flow, it is an absolutely critical strategy that we have to employ to ensure that as migrants present themselves at ports of entry to request asylum, some aren't even requesting asylum, some are processed through other cases. However, these individuals, as they present themselves, as mentioned earlier, the ports are not designed to detain people for extended periods of time. So one of the steps that we have been pursuing is working with non-governmental organizations, in particular international organizations south of the border, to help provide us advance information through the CBP CBP One app, so that we can make decisions, not necessarily decisions on the determination of the inspection in advance, but that we can assess and determine who's coming towards us, do all of the administrative work in advance of individuals arriving at the ports of entry, and then certainly put them through a streamlined process as they arrive and make a final determination on the inspection.
Thank you. My next question is also for you, and I want to focus on technology. At times, I worry the border security technology discussion focuses too much on the regions between ports of entry and not enough on the ports themselves. Yet we know that criminal networks are constantly targeting our ports. So what gets in the way of CBP being able to deploy the right technologies at our ports of entry to allow our officers to keep pace with criminals who are continually adapting their tactics in response to U.S. capabilities?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Certainly, it is a challenge that persists, that as soon as new technology is deployed, our adversaries are well underway at how to overcome the strategies and the technologies that we employ. But certainly we look as comprehensively as possible at all of the opportunities and the investments, certainly, in the non-intrusive technology deployments that are going to occur over the next 18 to 24 months since the execution of the contracts. It's going to be critical to ensuring that our officers have the best information available to make the decisions quickly. Drive-through scanning systems, again, tying that information. I think where we have a vulnerability and need to work towards is advanced information for travelers over the land border. That's really the next step for us in closing the gaps and vulnerabilities so that we can, again, continue to streamline travel. The vast majority of people that cross our ports of entry are legitimate travelers, and it's legitimate commerce. But that streamlined information will help us illuminate those bad actors and, again, give our resources, our frontline personnel, the time to invest in making the decisions to spend more time to determine intent and actually search the commodities.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Senator Lankford for his 7 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Sabatino, I want to continue this conversation you had raised in your opening statement as well about individuals who had false documents when they crossed the border at the land ports of entry. So there's really two things that are connected here. One is the ability to be able to identify false documents. I'd assume that's dealing with the document plus facial recognition. When we'll be at a point where all of our land ports of entry can actually do facial recognition to be able to line up and to compare that with the document that's been handled. And the second thing is, you mentioned that 950 of these fraudulent documents came across last year in all ports, 600 of those of the southwest border. And I want to make sure I heard that number correct, that last year we had 600 false documents or documents that came across, but it wasn't actually the person that was holding the card. Is that correct?
Yes, we had, since the deployment of the facial biometric technology in all of our port environments, air, maritime, and land, the deployments for simplified arrival in our pedestrian lanes really was initiated with, it started in Tucson about a year and a half ago, but more significantly since January of this year, and over 600. I don't have the exact number, I can certainly follow up, but of the 950, it was over 600 that have been identified at our southwest border ports of entry.
Were these legitimate cards, just not the person that was actually holding it?
Imposters to genuine documents.
Okay. So then the question is, what happened to those legitimate documents then? It's a border crossing card or a passport, I assume. One of those, are those being held? Is there a need for those to be able to go back to individuals? Is there if you're going to get another border crossing card for that individual, some kind of process where they can re-request it so we know what happened and how this ended up in their hands?
Well, certainly through the interview process and trying to obtain the information from the individuals that we encounter. With individuals who present themselves as imposters, we can make referrals for federal prosecution for false claims, certainly in the scenario if they're presenting themselves as an imposter to U.S. citizenship. But with respect to the documents themselves, they are not returned to individuals. They are retained, and we dispose of them consistent with the policy with respect to the individual documents, which agency they could be returned to.
So you can actually prosecute those individuals that show that are imposters, that are showing legitimate documents, just not the right person. How often do we?
In the last fiscal year, we presented, and there were just under 500 cases of fraudulent documents accepted for prosecution. That is a national number. It's not specific to the southwest border.
Okay, we'll follow up on that, get a specific number to know how we're prosecuting those. The non-intrusive inspection, we have, Senator Sinema and I both have talked about that already, both in opening statements and questions. From a staff briefing that we had in September, we've learned that some of the money that had been allocated for non-intrusive inspections in other areas and other ports have actually been shifted to the southwest border for other purposes other than non-intrusive inspections. Are you aware of that, and how much has actually was dedicated to non-intrusive inspections has actually been moved to other purposes?
With respect to reprogramming funding, in response to user fee shortfalls and covering salaries, the specifics about where the funding and to what it was allocated, I can certainly follow up.
Okay,
provide
let's do. Obviously, there's been a high priority in both sides of the aisle on non-intrusive inspections, both for drug interdictions and other contraband, and obviously facial recognition to be able to line up documents to see if they're actually accurate. We want to be able to see that continue and not be reprogrammed into other areas. Can I ask a question as we're trying to track this? We're getting very close to some deadlines here for CBP. Do you know what percentage of the CBP employees have been vaccinated or are facing possible issues for the vaccine mandate that's been laid down right now?
The numbers continue to grow. I don't have exact data. We do have until the November 22nd deadline.
That's a week, yeah.
Yeah, and we're very optimistic about the numbers coming in.
Do you have a guess on that percentage? Obviously, we're a week away. I would assume you would have some idea of how many people have not turned in their status on vaccination when we're just a week away.
I don't have a good number for you today, sir. We'll follow up.
Mr. Geronimo, do you have a good number for that, the HSI, the ICE?
I do not, sir.
Mr. Burns, are you aware of that for GSA?
I'm not aware of the number. That's not in my area.
Okay, we'll follow up in the next week. Obviously, that should be known. I would tell you it's interesting to me the number of agencies that I've talked to that don't know that answer. We've reached out to multiple agencies. We deal with the federal workforce issues as well as national security issues. If we have a large number of individuals that are not vaccinated that'll go through the process of removal over the holiday period, that they're going to suddenly be removed from their jobs, it's a very expensive process to be able to hire, train, equip, and be able to reach out to bring on additional folks. I assume, Ms. Sabatino, you don't have too many employees at this point right now. That the last I saw that y'all had a backlog of staff that you needed to hire. Is that still true?
We have a robust pipeline of individuals for the CBP officer position. And with respect to the vaccine mandate, there is also a population of individuals that can and have requested reasonable accommodations. So the process is expected to be over several months. We have been very engaged with our stakeholders as well, ensuring that they understand what the timelines for any impact, and we will forecast for them as soon as we see any even remote potential for that.
So your timeline for the accommodation and the answers to get back to individuals that are asking for accommodation is when? Whether that be medical, personal, or religious accommodations?
For religious and medical, and it is an established process to go through to request reasonable accommodations. It's not new for the vaccination mandate, and it's going to be contingent on the volume that we do have.
But you expect that to take how long?
That could take several months.
All right. Mr. Geronimo, we continue to deal with, obviously, a large flow of methamphetamines coming into the country from Mexico. This has been an ongoing issue for quite a while. What are you seeing as far as trend lines and what you're seeing for transnational criminal organizations moving, and if some of the techniques changed, and what do we need to accommodate for technology or other staffing?
Sir, thank you for your question. I'll start with the technology piece. Because cartels and TCOs are ever changing and ever evolving, we need to do the same. So a couple of items that I'd bring to your attention from a technology perspective is implementing mobile drug labs along the southwest border. Due to the fact that we're not necessarily dealing with just marijuana and cocaine anymore, we're dealing with synthetic narcotics, and again, it's difficult sometimes to determine what those substances are. So having a mobile drug lab platform along the southwest border would be welcomed. Pollen testing, if you're not familiar with it, pollen testing gives you the ability to provide with some certainty the geographical origin of where fentanyl and meth are being made. For example, it can tell you that this fentanyl is being produced in Guadalajara or Michoacan area, or it's been made in some province in China. I would also talk about using drones for offensive and defensive purposes, using drones for countering surveillance and for operational needs, as well as the ability to counter the use of drones by TCOs who are using them for bringing narcotics. And obviously, you saw recently in Iran the fact that it can be used for other means. As far as inflow, from a perspective that if I was a cartel, I wouldn't waste my time with marijuana, and I don't even know if I'd get out of the cocaine business, because at the end of the day, with synthetic opiates and drugs of that nature, you're purchasing dual-use chemicals that are legal in most cases. You need a warehouse and a chemist, and at the end of the day, this is not going to go away. This continues to be an issue. From an HSI perspective, we've been on the front lines since day one of the opiate crisis. We've taken our Border Enforcement Security Task Force, or BESS, increased that from a traditional border perspective, and moved that and increased our presence at international mail facilities, consignment hubs, seaports, and we've non-traditional locations like Ohio and Michigan, for example, to put BESS in. We have operations like Die Another Day, which is a partnership with CBP, U.S. Postal Service, DEA, focusing on pill presses that are being imported into the United States to be used to make illicit substances. When it comes to precursors, HSI and CBP are leading the way, by far leading the way in that. In the last 18 months, we've seized over 500 kilograms of precursors destined to TCOs. That's 1 million pounds of precursors to be used for meth and fentanyl. The other thing is partnerships. We are in tune with our federal and state and local partners, CBP, DEA, U.S. Postal, FBI. There's not a place where we're not working collectively together as a whole government approach. I understand your frustration in this, but it's not from a lack of effort on behalf of the men and women within HSI and CBP working the front line, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lankford. Next, I'll recognize Senator Carper for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to you and our ranking member, thanks for holding this important hearing, and to our witnesses, thank you very much for joining us. I think I might have time for 2 questions. The first would deal with supply chain issues, and the second would focus on CT-PAT related issues. And we start off with the first thing with respect to supply chain. I'm going to direct this question to Deputy Assistant Commissioner Diane Sabatino, and I said in my notes here, it says DAK Sabatino. Is that a first name? What is DAK? Is that your name?
Yeah, it's Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I serve as chair on the subcommittee on international trade, on customs and global competitiveness, on the finance committee. As I'm sure you know well, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a host of supply chain issues for the availability of goods, ranging from consumer products to vehicles to canned goods. My question is this: given CBP's mission to facilitate lawful international trade and travel, could you just talk with us for a bit about any lessons learned from the pandemic and how CBP adapted to address a change in any trade patterns?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think from a perspective and not unique to CBP, certainly leveraging virtual technology across the field operations enterprise in a number of different areas, leveraging the expertise of our personnel across all of our ports of entry on a daily and recurring basis now that we have the ability to engage with them as frequently through Microsoft Teams and other endeavors. So certainly moving to a virtual environment, virtual engagements with all of our stakeholders, allowing us to reach more individuals with, a timely message simultaneously instead of multiple gaps, between stakeholders, and ensuring that we have a consistent message. Again, not unique, certainly to CBP, but leveraging the virtual environment as well for things like renewals of global entry applicant programs, freeing up 2,300 interviews per week to ensure that we tackle the volume that built up while the global entry enrollment centers were closed during the pandemic. think from a trade perspective, as I mentioned, tapping into the expertise of our individuals across the country and really leveraging them in national dialogue with large stakeholder forums. I think, from the CTPAT perspective, also working with our international partners and companies overseas, again, virtual engagements and validations, things that we had traditionally relied on, costly travel, costly paperwork. I think really taking advantage of the technology is a lesson learned for CBP, and not losing sight of our opportunities to continue to leverage that while we're moving out of the significant travel restrictions and challenges, but really moving in the trade environment to as paperless a process as possible. Innovating in our seized property process, in our vaults, leveraging biometric technology, again, creating frictionless and touchless environments, not just in the traveler space, but also in our own workspaces. And frankly, looking at our footprint across all of our offices to ensure that we are truly leveraging the space that we need and, reallocating resources, from costly investments that clearly we've demonstrated we can use towards other, programs and tackling other threats.
All right, thanks, Mark. I think I have time for another question. Let me just get this one in, if I can. Also, Ms. Sabatino. Senator Corn and I have introduced, we're the co-leads on a trade subcommittee and finance committee, but we've introduced legislation. It's called the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, or CTPAT. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but a pilot program act which recently passed out of our Committee on Finance by voice vote. Our bill would expand the successful program within CBP that allows trusted merchants to voluntarily submit themselves to enhanced screening and information sharing in exchange for a fast-track customs clearance process for imported goods. Ultimately, we believe it will strengthen our national security while creating jobs and expediting the movement of goods. Since you mentioned the benefit of the current CTPAT program and use it at CBP in your testimony, I hope to continue work on this issue with you and your colleagues at the agency. My question would be this, Commissioner Sabatino, what other steps should Congress consider to modernize and improve the security of imported goods at our ports of entry?
We certainly look forward to working with you on the legislation. The CTPAT program is a very important program to us because we rely very heavily on the companies that are invested in the program to also help illuminate those bad actors that we can identify in the supply chain. We rely on them, certainly to trust in us to do our mission and receive the benefits, of the program. With respect to, the future of the CTPAT program, the work that we're doing in engaging with other similar programs, international programs, where we can, I think BASC is a good example of that, and having recently signed an agreement with the BASC organization to help collaborate on some of these investments in identifying the good actors in the trade space, but also help us illuminate the vulnerabilities and the bad actors, as well as the networks tied to those bad actors.
All right, great. Thank you so much for those responses. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for your service.
Thank you, Senator.
I believe we're waiting for Senator Padilla to join, and while we're waiting, I'll continue to ask some questions until he arrives. My next question is for Mr. Geronimo. I know that HSI is focused on transnational criminal organizations, but what does Congress and the public need to be aware of about TCOs and their exploiting of security gaps at our ports of entry? Are there technology investments needed at our ports that could assist in HSI investigations to allow us to more effectively disrupt and counter these criminal groups?
Thank you for your question, ma'am. First of all, I applaud the committee and legislative affairs for their efforts in passing the recent bill, which gives CBP the ability to upgrade the ports of entry. And the reason I say that is every time CBP makes an interdiction, it gives HSI an opportunity to take that interdiction and turn it into a criminal investigation. And then turning that criminal investigation and furthering that, and hopefully to identify and build out networks and identify the TCOs and for disruption, dismantlement, and potential prosecution. Some of the areas that, with that, as interdictions increase because of this NII process, that would result in HSI being resourced in order to respond to those. Currently, 20% of our work hours, or total work hours, are specific to CBP's port of entry seizures. That's 20%. That's fairly significant. And every time there is an interdiction by CBP, HSI spends at a minimum 95 hours to handle that interdiction from cradle to grave. 95 hours. That's 12 business days. So again, that's significant in nature, and that's a huge commitment. And I'm a knuckle dragger by nature, so I try to dumb things down for myself. But the point here is, if you have a port of entry where there's 1,000 cars that go through it, and CBP inspects 10% of that, they're inspecting 100 cars. And if their hit rate is 10%, there's 10 cars with illegal substances. HSI is mandated and is non-discretionary, has to respond to that. So as NII continues to improve, and CBP now inspects 500 cars, and their hit rate's still 10%, that's 50 cars with narcotics that we're going to have to. So that's us responding to those and trying to build out those seizures and interdictions into long-term investigations and building out those networks. I will say, from resource-wise, continue to deal with encrypted communication. That has been a sore subject for us, as far as continue to keep up with cartels and TCOs in regards to encrypted communication and dealing with that. Approving the Shadow Wolves Enhancement Act would be a plus. That would help close the gap, especially in the tribal lands, as far as TCOs taking advantage of that. And a more collaborative approach. I look at things in 4 buckets, ma'am. I look at things from an interdiction perspective, intelligence perspective, interdiction, investigation, and prosecution. And the goal is to move from one bucket to another bucket as seamlessly as possible. And sometimes, unfortunately, somebody thinks their bucket is more important. But I think when we're able to work collectively together, it all means something, because intelligence is good, but if you can't operationalize it, it doesn't mean anything. You can interdict things all day long, but that's not going to change anything. You can work the best case ever, but if you can't get a prosecution, arrest somebody and put them in jail, it really doesn't mean much. So working collectively together across those avenues is vital. So in totality, again, I appreciate everybody's support in regards to HSI's efforts from combating TCOs.
Thank you, Mr. Geronimo, and thank you for mentioning the Shadow Wolves bill. That's a bill I've offered, and we've passed this committee, and we're working to pass it through this entire Congress, so I appreciate that. Senator Padilla, you are recognized for 7 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, California's lands, ports of entry are the busiest border crossings in the Western Hemisphere, which creates considerable opportunities for bilateral trade and economic cooperation. Unfortunately, a recent study found that delays at land ports of entry in 2016 caused nearly $1.6 billion in lost economic output and more than 12,000 unrealized jobs in California alone. Without capacity enhancements, the adverse impacts of delays for both personal trips as well as freight movements at these ports of entry will continue to grow and intensify. The San Diego Association of Governments and the California Department of Transportation, in coordination with state and federal partners in the U.S. and Mexico, are carrying out the State Route 11 Otay Mesa East Port of Entry project in order to create a new multimodal land port of entry. Now, this project seeks to leverage technology, including interchangeable passenger and commercial vehicle primary inspection lanes, to better manage traffic, demand, and decrease wait times across all ports of entry in the region. Questions for Ms. Sabatino. I appreciate that CBP is constructively engaging with the project sponsors to identify the staffing requirements for the Otay Mesa East facility. What steps or assurances can the administration provide to state and local governments with respect to staffing for this project so that we're prepared when it's time to open?
Senator, thank you for the question, and we are always excited about the prospect of newly designed infrastructure for our ports of entry and the ability to incorporate the technology that we're working to identify and implement today at the onset and development. Regarding the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, with any new project, we leverage our workload staffing model, and we incorporate those new projects. And with this particular project, I think the next steps are engaging with the respective program offices in the National Capital Region here, and they've been very engaged both with the San Diego field office and the local leadership, which we greatly appreciate. But we do have additional steps to work on validating the information and modeling the project to really identify what those staffing needs could be. But then we also use our workload staffing model as a decision tool for the allocation of the resources that we have authorized on board.
All right. But in anticipation of the staffing needs come 2023, two-part question. One, will that resources for sufficient staffing be part of the budget for 2023? And part two of the question is, given how long it takes to fill staffing pipelines, what steps are we taking now to ensure that there will be adequate staffing when it opens potentially as early as 2024?
Thank you, Senator. I am very pleased to be able to say that we do have a robust pipeline. It is an investment going back over 10 years in ensuring that we have a cadre of people ready to onboard, and our staffing numbers have reflected that. And we've really been limited, frankly, by training seats available at times versus not having the individuals to place into the positions. We will certainly continue to work with you and your staff on the needs for the particular ports in Southern California. And again, leveraging and briefing with the information available through the workload staffing model, which again is our best resource, and we continue to refine that resource. The workload staffing model, certainly impacted by the travel downturn, still reflected a need for officers as well as our agriculture model, because when the travel decreased, we reallocated resources to other areas and certainly demonstrated a need and a workload in things like our outbound environment, mail and express consignment facilities. So as travel comes back and that gets layered in, we do expect to see changes and increases in what the staffing models reflect as well, to include new locations.
Thank you. Next question on the same project for Mr. Burns. I understand that one option under consideration is for GSA to take possession of the Otay Mesa East facility once it's built, and then to enter an agreement with CBP to equip it and to staff it. So number one, is that accurate? And two, if that's a scenario that does play out, what other responsibilities a company taking a possession of a facility like that?
So thank you for the question. I'm familiar with the project. Since the funding would be coming from the project sponsor, I haven't seen the final final funding proposal for it becoming fully functional. But certainly, we would be prepared to take that into our inventory and begin to service it and maintain that facility.
Okay, we'll look forward to a continuing conversation about this in the year or two ahead. Question more broadly about land ports of entry. I know in California, delays and the resulting vehicle idling has had a considerable impact on air quality in the surrounding regions, including significant increase in emissions. These delays resulted in an average release of 457 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions alone per day in 2016. A recent study also highlighted how reducing delays would lower the emissions of pollutants like carbon monoxide and particulate matters. Back to you, Ms. Sabatino. How can reducing delays at land ports of entry reduce not just environmental impacts but health impacts, and what plans are in place to attempt to achieve these reductions?
And thank you for the question, and I do apologize. I think also in part answers the question that Senator Lankford mentioned earlier with respect to the timeline for simplified arrival in vehicle lanes. That's our facial biometric comparison technology. We are currently testing that in the Port of Anzalduas in select lanes and really working with both the industry as well as our Office of Information Technology. We rolled out simplified arrival in the air environment and the maritime environment. It did move very quickly in the pedestrian environment. the vehicle environment, because of the environmental challenges that we have, it really is going to be a larger hurdle than the other deployments. But we look forward to keeping you apprised of the deployment schedule as we see it rolling out. I believe we are going to expand to an additional pilot location in another location in Texas. But San Ysidro in particular is one location that we are targeting once we have the right technology identified to leverage because of the volume that comes through that particular port. We've been engaged with the local leadership on the ground from CBP to talk about identifying amenable populations for even lanes where we could potentially pilot that in the next phase.
Okay. Thank you for your work. Look forward to the ongoing collaboration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. We have time to start a second round of questions, so I'll start with another round of questions, first to Ms. Sabatino. As part of the FY21 appropriations package, Congress improved important bipartisan language regarding the creation of a pilot program that would expand the border crossing card program in Arizona and allow vetted Mexican travelers with an I-94 to travel throughout Arizona. This is an important initiative for my state that has the potential to make border crossing more efficient for travel and trade. Can you provide the subcommittee an update on CBP's progress in implementing this expansion, what hurdles you might have experienced, and the plans you have to overcome those challenges?
Thank you, Chairwoman. And I do not, unfortunately, have a good answer for you on the particular pilot program because of the challenges with the travel restrictions that project did not develop as it could have had we not encountered the COVID pandemic. However, we are looking at the opportunities to implement that pilot program and actually see it as a short-term solution and gap filler for things that I had mentioned earlier when we're talking about advanced information and more comprehensively looking at the traffic coming across the border, individuals applying for and receiving the provisional I-94s in advance and being able to issue those right at primary. So a number of efforts underway, that a short term, and we will follow up with you on, the developments and what a timeline could be for that project.
I appreciate that. Another question for you. In Arizona and other border states, we've had a recurring problem of understaffing at our ports of entry. So I'm sure you're aware. Office of Field Operations workforce staffing models for ports in areas such as Nogales indicate that the hiring has improved somewhat. But I do always worry about retaining experienced officers who understand the challenges unique to the U.S.-Mexico border. What are the key concerns that OFO leadership hears from port officers that get in the way of them successfully doing their job? And what steps are you all taking to improve these workforce morale and retention challenges?
And very important to CBP and in particular the Office of Field Operations for our frontline personnel and all of our personnel who have been so significantly impacted along with the rest of the country by the pandemic. We do have a number of investments, that cover a spectrum of, target areas. I think first and foremost, the investments that the Office of Field Operations has made in peer support teams and investments in the chaplain program where we have resources right on the ground for employees, certainly to engage with employees should they identify any challenges, but a resource if they don't want to pick up the phone and reach out through the employee assistance program, that they have someone that they can talk to that they know and that they're comfortable with. And we message that aggressively with our personnel. There's also the employee assistance program where there's a variety of services available to our workforce should they need anything with respect to challenges, assistance managing finances, mental health resources for them. These are all different opportunities given the comfort level of the individual to, who they would like to speak to. I think the agency has also made a significant investment in bringing on clinicians to help us guide these programs, and enhance them. We also have the Workforce and Resiliency Division in the National Capital Region that looks at opportunities to engage employees in morale building and team building programs that we deploy out to the field.
Thank you. And Mr. Geronimo, the same basic question for you. Can you speak to the challenges impacting HSI personnel and agency efforts to improve morale and retention?
Thank you for your question, Chairwoman. I will say that HSI always recruits very well. When we have announcements for 1811 special agent positions, we have a robust applicant pool. We also even do female-only announcements. So we've never had an issue in the recruiting process, and I believe the reason for that is we're not a single scope mission agency. We're able to attack criminal organizations or TCOs from multiple fronts, and I think that is important when we're looking for new recruits. I also point out that HSI might be relatively new in name, but HSI and CBP have a legacy that goes back to 1789 with the creation of U.S. Customs, and we have a very long tradition. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Is what I would put out there. I also say if there is one thing that does bring morale down for HSI is our inability to work with some jurisdictions because we're under the umbrella of ICE. It's well documented that certain jurisdictions will not work with HSI because of that fact alone, and it's a bit frustrating for HSI and its employees because the only thing we're looking to do is work with these jurisdictions to enforce narcotics investigations, child exploitation, cyber, gang enforcement, money laundering, human smuggling, human trafficking. And at the end of the day, we're only focusing on the safety and well-being of those particular citizens in those jurisdictions and the nation as a whole. So that is a frustrating point for us in that regards, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Portman, I see you've joined the committee. I'd like to recognize you for 7 minutes of questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Senator Sinema, one, for having this hearing. You and Senator Lankford are to be commended for that. There's so much going on at the border and so much need for oversight. Obviously, we've had some terrible statistics recently. We look at the month of October, and we're told the highest number of encounters with illegal immigrants in any October in the history of our country. So we are breaking records, it seems, every month. There's clearly a crisis at the border. I would ask quickly, if I could, and perhaps Ms. Sabatino, you're the right one to answer this. How many people got away? In other words, the so-called getaway number. And if you have, say, 164,000 people who have been apprehended or encounters, how many people do you think you're not finding who are coming across the border illegally?
I do not have that number, sir. That is something I will have to follow up and certainly get from our colleagues in the Border Patrol. We do work closely with our colleagues in the Border Patrol to assist them with resources as they're available and as needed.
The estimate that they've given me is that they think, somewhere between 15 and 20% on top of that. But I'd be interested in any data you could provide us on that. Along with that, of course, we had terrible numbers this week with regard to this issue of overdoses of people in the United States who are taking opioids. And we look more closely at it, it turns out almost all of these opioids are connected to fentanyl in some way or another. Sometimes it might be another drug, even heroin or a non-opioid like cocaine, but fentanyl mixed in with it or mixed in with a pill. And this fentanyl is killing more and more of our American citizens. 100,000 people died of overdoses between April 2020 and April 2021, we were just told in the last couple of days. That number, 100,000, has never been reached before. It's a terrible record, and it indicates that so many Americans are succumbing to this fentanyl that's so deadly that comes in primarily across the Mexican border. For a while, it was coming mostly from China. Now we know it's coming mostly from Mexico. So I looked at those numbers, and it turns out in October, we had a 42% increase in fentanyl seizures coming in over the border. And I know you are perhaps more focused on that in some respects because much of this comes through the ports of entry, actually. But a 42% increase in this deadliest of drugs coming in over the southern border, seems to me we have a national emergency here. Can you give us a sense of what you think the amount of drugs are that are coming in that are not being seized? If it's 42% increase in seizures, what is it overall?
I would have to do math on the fly, sir, and I apologize. I'm not equipped to do that. We can certainly follow up with estimates. We did seize in the last fiscal year over 10,000 pounds of fentanyl coming across to our ports of entry. Over 9,000 pounds was in particular at the southwest border. So I think with the investments that we're making in technology, in particular the NII deployments that we're going to be doing over the next 18 to 24 months, and frankly not quick enough, it's going to help us certainly in that endeavor to tackle that challenge. challenge, but we also work very closely with our partners in HSI and other federal government partners because the best we can do certainly is identify these networks that are bringing this to our ports of entry in deep concealments, in either commodities or in private vehicles coming across the border. But the continued investment in resources like canine assets, but also our intelligence units that we are building out in conjunction with our Office of Intelligence in the National Capital Region to make sure that we're providing our frontline staff with the best available information about these networks, how to identify these threats, and recent concealment methods. But would also defer to my colleague with HSI as well with respect to the investigative efforts related to fentanyl.
Well, thank you. And look, I appreciate what you're doing. We have provided more resources for technology and for people, and we should. But it sounds like in the next couple of years, we'll have better technology. We saw some of this on the border earlier this year when some was toured. And, the technology is good. But the one thing I would emphasize is that by allowing more of these drugs to come in across our southern border, more drugs are getting on the streets in our communities at a lower price. In other words, the increased supply is decreasing the price and making it easier for people to be able to afford these deadly drugs. So I am, for one, someone who believes strongly in dealing with the demand side of this, better prevention efforts, more treatment. We were making progress in that longer-term recovery. We were making progress there. But unfortunately, in the last year and a half, we have seen this huge increase. And I think some of it is attributable to the fact that the volume is so high now and the price is so relatively depressed because of that, that it's creating more of a problem. Mr. Geronimo, do you have an answer to this question about if we have a 42% increase, if we're finding 9,000 pounds of this stuff, which, by the way, is enough to kill every man, woman, child in my home state of Ohio. It's an enormous amount of fentanyl, 9,000 pounds. But do you, Mr. Geronimo, have a sense as to what we're missing? In other words, how much of these deadly substances are coming in across our border and not being detected?
Sir, I don't have the answer to that particular question, but I will tell you HSI's efforts along with our partners. Last year alone, HSI seized over 40,000 pounds of fentanyl opiates to address this issue. It starts internationally, and we do have a vast presence overseas, 86 offices in 55 countries, but more importantly, we have our partnerships with our foreign counterparts through our Transnational Criminal Investigative Units, or TCIUs. They're vetted units, and that allows us to operationalize information as they come in. I had mentioned earlier to Senator Lankford that in the last 18 months, HSI, in partnership with CBP and DEA, we seized over 500 kilograms of precursor chemicals coming into Mexico to be used by TCOs. That's 1 million pounds of precursors.
Mr. Geronimo, were those precursors coming from China?
In most cases, yes, sir.
And do you have an office in China?
We do have an attaché there, sir.
Do you have an office there?
Yes,
you
we have
mentioned the offices you
Yes,
have?
sir. We do have an attaché there. Again, 1 million pounds of precursors. The other efforts that we made domestically, and I mentioned this earlier, was expanding our BESTs into the mail facilities, international mail facilities, as well as the airports and into what I would consider interior states like the state of Ohio. Our BESTs, or Border Security Task Force, have been traditionally along the southwest border, but we've expanded that at the inception of the opiate crisis, as well as focusing on the mechanisms for producing these pill presses. We have an operation called Die Another Day, which again is in partnership with CBP, DEA, and the U.S. Postal Service, where we're focused on the importation of pill presses that are used for illicit substances in the production. Any additional?
Well, look, my time is expiring here, and again, I thank you for what your officers are doing on the ground and in foreign countries. I will just make the obvious point. You said that there are all sorts of precursors coming from China into Mexico, so China is still very involved in this, even though there's less coming directly from China, thanks, I think, in large measure to the STOP Act, which this subcommittee and committee passed. But I think we need to make the point that this poison is coming in record numbers despite all of your good efforts. So what do we need to do differently to be able to address this issue, both on the supply side and the demand side? And again, I thank you for what you're doing. You by finding 9,000 pounds are saving lives. There's no question about it. but we need to do better. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Portman. I'd like to return back to Senator Lankford for his second round of questions.
Thank you. It's rare for us to have CBP and GSA sitting at the same table together, so I want to have some dialogue between the three of us, if I can do that. There are 101 land ports of entry that GSA has custody of, and 40 that CBP has custody of. They're in all different conditions, all different ages. The challenge becomes, how do we maintain this, and why do we have ownership sometimes in GSA and sometimes in CBP? The last report that we got back in is if there's going to be major changes in a facility or a new facility, it's about a 7-year process to be able to get in line to go through the process to be able to do that. If it's a project over $100,000 in one of those facilities, CBP can't do that. GSA has to be able to do that. And so we have some unique dynamics here on how that works as a entity that's leasing or that's owning and sometimes owning and trying to be able to manage that. So my question on this is, why does the jurisdictional split why is that happening? Has happened? Is that just kind of organically grown up over the years? Is there a better way to be able to handle this? And let me just start with you, Mr. Burns. Let's start from the GSA perspective.
Well, thank you for that question. My understanding is the roughly 40 buildings, facilities that are in CBP's control and custody are legacy. They were initially part of the group that CBP is, and they remained in their inventory when GSA was created. They're generally much smaller facilities and generally singular in focus, and by that I mean it's not a multi-tenanted facility, doesn't have multiple inspection agencies. I think where GSA creates the value in the ownership is when we're balancing the needs of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration with FDA and with CBP to balance all those needs and create a facility that suits all of their purposes.
So your assumption is at this point, if we've got multiple agencies that come through this, and obviously our land ports of entries do, CBP not being the owner, GSA being a third-party owner is a better model for that.
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay. Sabatino, talk to me a little bit about the maintenance and the upkeep and expansion, adding additional facilities, or just operation. How do we make this better?
Certainly working very closely with our Office of Facilities and Asset Management and GSA, we can shorten that timeline. We're working with them to process map the individual projects to find efficiencies and set better deadlines. I think some of the challenges that we face together is all of the other stakeholders that we have to engage with throughout the process, from the local, state, and federal entities that are involved in some way, shape, or form of the upkeep or management potentially of a facility. I think from a CBP perspective and the facilities that we manage and the last investments that we had back in 2009, we were able to do some significant modernization efforts because of the support of Congress, for those particular locations. And again, continue to work, sometimes even on a very case-by-case basis as challenges come up. I think certainly having the resources to make the investments, either from GSA or from CBP, remains a challenge. But that's why through the 5-year LPOE plan, where we prioritize those needs, there's been some delegations of authority for limited amounts that CBP can address challenges ourselves.
That's the 100,000 amount.
I believe that's the number, sir. It might be lower than that. I'd have to get back to you on the actual amount. But those have been added value. I think with also the opportunities through the donation acceptance program and our reimbursable services program, the public-private partnership and the donations acceptance program in coordination with GSA has really been a phenomenal resource for us as, travel and commerce growth exceeds, both potentially GSA and CBP's, resource availability to make the investments and grow with the pace of the private sector. We do have, and we appreciate your support, the donation acceptance program. There is a sunset as of December 16th for the real property donations that we are looking, and hopefully we'll have addressed before that date. That's going to be very important to us to maintain the ability to do that that as well. But it is an ongoing dialogue, and not just at the national level, the regional level, and the local level on all of our projects. We do have a full assessment ongoing of all of the 167 ports of entry that'll continue through FY23. And we expect to be able to provide you a completely prioritized portfolio of all of those ports of entry that we're going to continue to work with GSA on, as well as our individually owned ports of entry.
When will we get that inventory?
The full prioritization, we're going to be doing the assessments through FY23, but certainly the LPOE 5-year plan that we submit every year captures our highest priorities.
So let me tell you what I hear, because I've visited over the last 7 years a lot of different land ports of entry. I've had the opportunity to be able to visit with a lot of different folks from CBP. What I hear consistently is, I want to do a project. There's something that, whether it's plumbing, air conditioning, repainting, whatever it may be, and they want to do it, and they turn it into GSA, and GSA gets it into the list, and it takes forever to be able to get done because they've got a ton of other things to be able to get done, and it ends up being something they work around. And the CBP folks will tell me, we would go get that done. We could hire a local contractor to do it if we own the facilities, but we can't actually do that. With the $100,000 limit, they're able to do some things now to be able to get it done, but it ends up costing more, taking longer than what they want it to be able to take if CBP were able to make the decision to be able to manage the funds on that. Now, that may be fair or unfair for GSA, and I'm sure, and I want to hear your response on that, but I've heard that over and over and over again in trying to be able to balance that out. Now, I understand CBP is not the only entity that's in that facility, but it is a challenge, both with dollars that GSA has got to be able to manage and very, very remote facilities that are very unique facilities. They're not office space. They're a very unique facility for this. So how do we start to solve that length of time, flexibility? I'd mentioned, I think it's $100,000. You said it may be even less than that. I may have that number wrong, but I thought it was right at $100,000 of repairs that could be done. What would be a recommendation from GSA to either raise that threshold, give more flexibility? The donation program is very important to be able to pick up additional land and real property that are around it, but sometimes a redesign is going to be required long term, and it's a much bigger project. From GSA's perspective, how do we solve both the time and the flexibility issue for properties that are very unique in the GSA portfolio?
So I appreciate the question and the comment there. I do agree with you that I believe that's $100,000. I believe that's established in statute, that our delegation authority goes up to $100,000. When you get to projects larger than that, the ones you mentioned, plumbing, et cetera, generally don't have a larger impact on the portfolio of a building that is in that facility. And so I'm happy to take that back and discuss with my team how we might be able to expedite some of those smaller projects. When you get into the larger projects and larger dollar thresholds, sometimes those affect systems that CBP may not even be aware of that are part of the overall facility. And so that's why we'd like to have a voice into that process. There's also, we have expertise in the other issues that need to be taken care of in some of those larger projects. I would point to environmental reviews, coordinating with historic preservation requirements. We have the skill and the expertise to handle those, but I certainly appreciate your point that some of these smaller projects that you're hearing about, and I've been to the ports as well and talked with board directors, so I'm aware of that pain point and happy to look into that.
So I'd love to be able to maintain this conversation and be able to keep this going, because this is one that needs to be resolved. Because we can't have a situation where it takes 7 years to be able to move things through the study phase when we've got tremendous needs, and many of these facilities are decades and decades old and very out of date. Ms. Sabatino, for detention space at your CBP facilities, what's the largest area you've got for detention space, for instance, in those locations? Maximum number of what, and what location might that be?
Off the top of my head, sir, I don't have a specific, we can provide you kind of a breakdown. I think where we're challenged with capacity to hold individuals, because we don't have true detention.
Yeah, it's not set up for
space,
that.
but to hold individuals is really driven by the demographic of what is in the port during the day. One or two family members at certain ports could, fill the capacity that we have available. If we had all single adult males, certainly we could have more in a port of entry. So it is a number for us that fluctuates.
But it's well below capacity from what real life situation is now versus what it was 50 years ago when it was constructed.
The current ports of entry, right, they're not designed for the operational needs that we have today, no.
Yeah, even in a lot of facilities where we have the traffic lanes and you have individuals that are waiting in line, get tired of waiting in line, and they run right through the traffic lanes. We're not set up to be able to secure those traffic lanes to be able to shut down foot traffic, even running through the middle of cars, which is a safety issue as well as a security issue. Correct or not correct?
It is a challenge that we experience in particular in the Port of San Ysidro on a recurring basis. But we do have measures that we take, including putting our officers in the primary vehicle lanes to prevent things like that from happening. But it also occurs in our outbound lanes.
There's serious issues that we've got to be able to resolve there. And I'd like to have an ongoing dialogue, maybe off camera at some point, to be able to help determine how we actually get this resolved, what the recommendations would be from CBP and from GSA to try to get this resolved. I know the $100,000 threshold is way too low to be able to do a lot of different projects, to be able to accelerate things that aren't going to be significant, but do need to be addressed and don't need to get into a long queuing process to actually get done. But there's also, we're going to have to deal with long-term, how do we actually deal with the ownership issues in other places? CBP also has some older facilities, as they were described as legacy facilities, that are not just legacy facilities, they're falling apart. They're in very remote areas, and they've got to have some attention to them as well. And to try to figure out for the individuals that are working in very, very remote areas, it's very difficult for them and their families to also have facilities that are also well maintained there. I know that's a allocation of priorities, and that's always going to be great. If Congress will give us a boatload more money, then we can fix all of these. I understand that, but it's trying to be able to set those priorities. So this 2023 list that we have coming will be very important to us in the days ahead as well. Let me ask a question about the Otay Mesa 2 project that's coming through. Do we know that Mexico is fulfilling its part of its responsibility at this point? There's a lot that's happening on the northern part of the border, but are they fulfilling what they have on the southern part of the border to also fulfill the access points coming into that new land port of entry?
Would you like me to take that? We work very closely with our Mexican counterparts, and there's a number of groups that we leverage to ensure that the pace is kept both on the southern side of the border with the northern side of the border. It doesn't always come to fruition. I think with respect to the Otay East project, certainly happy to provide follow-up, regarding what the status and developments are on the southern side of the border.
Mr. Burns, do you have any other comments on that?
I think that's covered it. Thank you.
Okay, that'd be helpful to get an update. The last that I saw for that particular land port of entry, Mexico was way behind schedule on getting this going. And so if we have everything on our side of the border ready to go and Mexico does not have their portion ready to go, that's not going to matter. And on the approach, it's not going to actually help us in that process to be able to have everything ready to go north and nothing's ready to go south. Are there other ports of entry that you're concerned about as far as the relationship between Mexico and the United States? I understand in most of our ports of entry that's been a very, very good working relationship.
Certainly at the local level with our counterparts on the southern side of the border, we do enjoy solid working relationships. An example, the unified cargo processing, where we actually have employees from SAT sitting in primary booths with our CBP officers doing joint cargo processing. It's a phenomenal example of the coordination that we have with Mexico and looking for opportunities to expand because it is, has a positive impact on the throughput that we have on both sides of the border. With respect to the different forums, we engage in a number of different forums, many led by the Department of State, with a host of other government agencies, as well as all of our Mexican counterparts, including the binational Bridge and Border Crossing Committee, the Joint Working Committee on Transportation Planning, all different engagements that we have with our international partners to prioritize, and also the border management strategy. We are working on, I think, an updated plan on what the priorities are on both sides of the border, where we want the investments to be made. Those are also things that we consider in our decision-making about investments in infrastructure as well. But that's all of the stakeholders on both sides of the border meeting on a regular and recurring basis.
That's great. Madam Chair, I have one more question. You okay?
Yep.
Mr. Geronimo, we deal a lot with transnational criminal organizations moving drugs. We've talked about that quite a bit, but there's also quite a bit of money that's being made moving people by transnational criminal organizations. Can you bring some clarity? I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on this, on how the Coyotes, as they're moving individuals through Central America up through Mexico, relate to transnational criminal organizations. Are these the same groups that are also smuggling drugs, or is it different groups?
Sir, thank you, and it's a very good question. Different groups. We have some things in place downrange in order to address this. I think our first effort is from what I would call a legal entry, and that's our visa security program, and that's in 28 countries and 41 issuing posts. That deals, in the last 3 years, we've vetted 4.6 million individuals through the visa security program, and nearly 9,500 of those individuals were denied access or entry into the United States due to terrorism nexus. So that, to me, is the front line pushing the border out. Our second effort is our biometric collection system. It's BitMap. That is a partnership with DOD, CBP Department, as well as FBI. We have BitMap locations in 18 countries. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity to enroll individuals as they come into the Western Hemisphere and make their way up through South America, into Latin America, and into Mexico. From Sao Paulo to McAllen is 5,000 miles. And when somebody enters into the Western Hemisphere, I can pretty much tell you with certainty when that individual arrives and where they're going to travel through and before they reach the southwest border. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity to know in advance who we're dealing with, especially individuals that we consider KSTs or individuals of interest to the United States before they reach the southwest border. The BitMap program last year enrolled 35,000 individuals, and about 80% of those do make it to the southwest border. I mentioned earlier our TCIUs or vetted units. That gives us an opportunity to operationalize or put into play things as far as information sharing. The vetted units have oversight of those BitMap locations, so those have been very effective in giving us some insight on who's coming up. Our ECT program is a partnership with DOJ, the Intel community, as well as CBP. The ECT program focuses on human smuggling organizations that cater specifically to KSTs or what we call special interest citizens, or SINCs. Those organizations, again, what we consider high level, and we've been very successful with that program. We've been able to move beyond the U.S. border and operationalize takedowns internationally. We've been able to effect arrests in different countries with the help of DOJ. So the ECT program has been very successful. In the last 2 years, we have initiated over 5,000 cases and nearly 8,000 arrests specifically to human smuggling organizations. So
8,000 arrests in the United States or outside the United States?
Combined.
Okay.
So 8,000 arrests.
The majority of those inside or outside the United States?
Inside, but outside as well. The last effort is recent, and that is Joint Task Force Alpha, and that is with DOJ. DOJ initiated an initiative focusing on the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Specific to that, that again is a partnership with CBP and DOJ, focusing again on organizations that are catering to that particular problem set. DOJ has identified about 25 HSI cases that they've considered top priority for that. So again, we are fighting the good fight in regards to human smuggling and trafficking, sir.
What's the current going rate for Coyotes in moving a person or a family?
Depends on location. If you're coming from Asia, it could be anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000. If you're coming from Brazil, it could be $10,000 to $15,000. If you come from Latin America, Mexico, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000.
You picking up any other trends on the trafficking of individuals coming in and from the Coyotes as they're moving? Anything that's changing? I know it's always changing, but anything new trends?
Nothing, sir, to report.
We've seen before with areas like when DACA was announced, the Coyotes used that moment to be able to work families in Central America and say, if you get your kids to America, they're going to become citizens right now. And that was not what was announced by the Obama administration, but that's what the Coyotes told people. And so we had an enormous surge that came during that time period. We had another enormous surge, which has not really slowed during the Biden administration with individuals that have been told who knows what from Central America and other countries as they're being told by Coyotes. When there's an announcement that individuals may be paid up to $450,000 if they were separated from the border, do you have reports yet of Coyotes using that kind of information, where there's leaked information now that there could be payments from the federal government to individuals that were illegally crossing in the last 4 years of $450,000, though I understand the Biden administration has argued with that number and has said that number. They've not argued with that policy or denied that that policy is actually, they just have said that number is not there. So I'm not going to ask you to verify that number. You wouldn't know. But are you getting reports of people actually using that, saying if you come now and you're separated, you may get a payment?
No, sir. We have not received any type of intelligence in that, specific to that.
Terrific. I hope we never do. But we'll see a lot of other incentives and a lot of things that have been twisted around in the past on this. Madam Chair, thank you for the additional time to be able to pummel them with some additional questions on this. I appreciate that very much.
They appear to have done just fine. Thank you, Senator Lankford. And thank you to our witnesses. With that, we've reached the end of today's hearing, and I appreciate all of you for your time and your testimony, and I want to thank all of my colleagues for their participation. This is an important subject, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to improve security, travel, and trade at our ports of entry. Today's hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks until December 2nd of 2021, and that's when questions for the record are also due. Thanks again. We're adjourned.